My name is Brian Woodman. I live in Kingston with my wife. Sorry, can I need to speak up? Okay. I'm an engineer by profession, and I started my career with BP exploration in the 70s and spent 40 years in underwater technology. I'm a member of the Purbeck Society, and I would encourage you to join the society. You get very good value for less than 3 cups of coffee a year. I think it's £10 joining fee, so it's really excellent value.
Speak up a bit more, Brian.
Sorry, yeah, maybe I should have got the microphone. Okay, so let me see if this works. The approval of 5G technology represents one of the most important decisions, I think, for CORF. And certainly we've seen examples of planning applications go in. There's a recent one that's gone in for CORF as well. There's Days Park that's been approved actually. But I'm coming from a slightly different angle to look at the benefits of this technology, plus also the impact it has on ourselves, our society, and certainly with nature as well in the environment. And the thing about 5G is to really make you aware, give you more information about 5G, because the public are not informed about 5G. We just call it 5G. It's 5th generation telecoms. But because it's invisible and it goes unmonitored, we kind of ignore it. So hopefully this presentation will help us all understand a bit more about it. So some background on 5G, and at top level, the government and the tech giants are certainly working very closely at a national level. It's national policy to roll this technology out. They want a high-capacity network throughout the UK, right across the UK, and they're working hard to do that. The technology will enable an Internet of Things, and I won't go into it now. I'll explain it later. But it's an enabling technology. This technology is driven by high-tech global corporations and telecom giants. It's extremely well funded, and there's significant financial incentives, not only with the technology, but also with the downstream products and machines, robots, phones, just about everything that you can imagine this technology will be enabled for these things to communicate, and I'll go into that later on. The regional councils and town councils are told not to interfere with government policy. And that gives me a problem, because the councillors in public office have a duty of care, not only to inform the public, but to look at the risks. And there are risks and there are harms. But they've been told not to interfere. So despite objections, the local councils are being railroaded through by national policy. I talked about Days Park earlier. There was recently a planning application for the mast at Days Park to upgrade the transducer. We know the telecoms company is a 5G company, and no doubt that mast will be fitted with 5G. And what concerns me is that it's right near a school, and despite public objection, there have been objections, it was approved within 1 day of the objections closing. So let's wind back. Let's wind back a bit and look at natural radiation and resonance on the Earth. We all like to take our shoes and socks off and go paddling, and we get this feel-good factor. Well, there's a reason for that. You're actually earthing your body to the natural resonance of the Earth. And obviously these natural radiations, even radio waves are coming in, heat, light, ionizing radiation is protected by our ionosphere. We get most of this from the sun, and it's called the Goldilocks conditions. So in a natural world, the Goldilocks conditions, everything is in balance. We're in balance. We've got a healing mechanism in ourselves that when we get into this vibration level, and it's 7.83 hertz, by the way, the Earth is vibrating at. It's called the Schumann resonance. And we are in a natural state. We're healing ourselves. We're healing our bodies. And you certainly get endorphins, and you feel quite happy when you're paddling, walking with nature. Along comes man-made radiation, and this is where it gets, you can look at all sorts of radiation. I won't go into all of this. I'm not an expert. I'm not a physics expert, but there's all sorts of radiations, as you can see here. And what we're talking about this afternoon is really these masts and the pulse frequency and the 5G radiation. It's called radiofrequency radiation. Unfortunately, this causes, let's call it an electrosmog, an invisible smog, a pollution just about everywhere. And this is concerning, because you can imagine if you've got all of these masts, you've got your smart meter in your home, all of this stuff is communicating, and there are some areas where they overlap, and you've got very high density frequencies, which is a concern. But no one's monitoring this. Each telecoms company is looking after their own patch. The council, to my knowledge, are not monitoring this at all. And that's one question we've got to the local councils. So you've got this electro-smog. It's everywhere. And just to go up a level now, you've got, this is quite shocking, the last count there was 100,000 satellites being planned to be launched around the Earth to increase this global network. Okay, so you're getting this RFR, this radio frequency radiation from way above the planet as well. So going back to 5G. 5G stands for fifth generation telecommunications, basically. They're working on sixth generation, so no doubt these masts will be upgraded into higher frequencies and higher radiation levels. It can be described as a millimeter wave pulsed radiation, unlike say 3G and the older generations. This is worked on a pulsed radiation. So if my phone polls for a signal, which it does every few seconds, that mast will basically send pulse radiation, a focus radiation, to my phone. And that gives it that high capacity of data. And if you look at 4G, this one here, that was in the megahertz range. 5G is up, in the gigahertz range, which is 1,000 times more data powerful, let's call it that, up at these sort of levels. So it's a step up, basically. I talked about its beam forming. It's more akin to radar and microwave, really, in terms of its direction and capability. Now, benefits are, obviously, you get extremely high data rates. If you go up that level to 5G, you're up at 1,000 times more than 4G technology, broadly speaking, which means you can do all sorts of clever things. Towns will require, however, because you're up a frequency, the distance, the transmission distance to get that density of traffic has to come down to meters, basically. Say 200 meters between lampposts with transducers on to give you this very high data capacity. So that's where we're seeing lampposts in towns and cities being fitted with these transducers to give you that data coverage. So I talked about the Internet of Things. where all electrical items, appliances, smart meters, street cameras, electric vehicles, phones, drones, robots, light bulbs even, can be controlled and monitored in more or less a real-time situation. And above that, you've got the ability to enter a virtual world. This is why we're seeing people like Elon Musk promoting, you know, put on a headset. I could put one on now and I could be in the Caribbean. Okay? This is where you're entering that virtual world. Yeah, the mix between the physical world and the virtual world. And for some people, that's very exciting. You know, I'm sure we get bored with the dull weather here this time of year. We might want to go and visit somewhere else. Well, with this technology, you can do that. So it's got tremendous capability and endless benefits in that sense. So you've got your towns with all of this connected. You've got your e-vehicles. Imagine a future where you hire a car and it's a driverless car. It takes you home and you have it. You have it for use for a few weeks. But if you forget to pay the bill, the driverless car goes back to the company you hire it from. Now, you may laugh, but this is where it could be going. You could be ordering your medication from the NHS and it gets delivered by a drone that's controlled by 5G. It's all possible. And of course, it's monetized. I mean, this whole business, there's huge money to be made in that type of business. So let's call it smart, to coin a phrase. Smartphones, most of us have got one somewhere. Smart vehicles, smart cars, smart energy, smart meters, smart homes. We know people where you can talk to a device on the table and you can play your favourite music instantly.
Lectures or whatever.
You can ask it all sorts of questions and it will give you answers. So, smart cities, smart farms. There's cases where farmers are tagging their cattle, their herd with devices, and they can track them. And even with a camera, the camera could be worn by the cow. And you can get instant information from your herd as to where they are while you're drinking your cup of coffee. So this is when you look at the monetization of this technology, it's huge. So you can see why it's being driven. And at the same time, there are control elements. There are, you may be speeding on the motorway, and unfortunately you get some points knocked off your license automatically. It's almost happening now, isn't it? Healthcare. We talked about delivery of your medications. The list is endless. I mean, you could have a surgeon in Los Angeles performing an operation in Bournemouth Hospital in real time with 5G technology. Of course, the data capacity is there. And the virtual world, well, that's we talked a bit about that. So this is the question, is it harmful? And of course, you've got the lobby, you've got the telecoms company, you've got the government pushing this technology and standing behind certain guidelines, which I'll come on to later. But let's look at what we know so far. The World Health Organization, they classify it in category 2B. It's a possible carcinogen. Now there's huge amounts of scientists now looking at this around the world. They want that upgraded to probable or certain in certain situations. Obviously, it depends on exposure to this radiation and your time limit, how strong the source is, and your time exposure. but there are links to cancers. And there's been lots of studies done, £30 million study done in America, National Toxicology Program, have found clear evidence of links to cancer-causing problems in humans and in animals. Now, the telecoms companies obviously don't want you scared. They want to roll out their technology, and it might come with a health warning on the side of the packet. Most mobile phone contracts tell you not to hold the mobile phone close to your head. It's in very small print because they know it will cause cancers, tumors in the head. So the telecoms companies have not released a single study saying that this is harmful. What they are releasing is say the heating effects of the radiation, because obviously your body is vibrating, you might feel heating effects, but the big question mark is the long-term effects on the human body and on animals and wildlife. And I'll show you a clip here just to break it up a bit.
Probably the most important thing I did, I was involved as a young scientist in the committee that actually reviewed the data and recommended that there be no smoking on airplanes. You may be shocked to hear that it was even a question for science at the time, but it was. And when I look at what we know now about mobile phone radiation, I see some very interesting similarities.
A growing number of prominent doctors and scientists are raising warning flags over radiation this morning, and your kids could be facing a greater risk of exposure.
I think the most important study is a study by the National Toxicology Program in a classic large carcinogenicity test, one of the largest ever performed, and for that matter, one of the most expensive. They found increased risk of the tumors, which we believe radiofrequency radiation is causing in man. Particular tumors called schwannomas. In the rats, they were in the heart. In humans, they're often in the nerve, the ear nerve, the vestibular nerve.
Cell phone providers say they follow all safety guidelines put into place by the FCC.
The current FCC safety standard was developed nearly 20 years ago.
The manufacturers actually tell people in the instruction manual, which I've never read, not to put the cell phone against your ear.
It does say exactly that. There's the BlackBerry, for example, warns to keep your phone at least 0.98 inches away from the body when transmitting. With an iPhone, for example, it's 5/8 of an inch.
At this point, the evidence has become sufficiently strong that cell phone radiation is a human carcinogen.
A major development from California's Department of Public Health. High use of cell phones may be linked to certain types of cancer and other health effects, including brain cancer and tumors, lower sperm counts, headaches, and effects on learning, memory, hearing, behavior, and sleep.
If it was a real problem, I would know. If it was a real problem, the government would protect us. How come I'm not hearing about this? They're all things I've heard when I give seminars. You know, I get up there and they say, oh yeah, if this was really a problem, they would have told us. I am they. I am a, legitimate scientist, and I am telling you.
Okay, so you can see there's been studies done, lots of money spent. So what are your symptoms with 5G, with this increased RFR? Electrosensitivity is known since 1932, the effects on human beings. It's recognized by the WHO, World Health Organization, and it's a physical intolerance of electromagnetic energy. It affects 80% of people subconsciously, 30% consciously, and 1.2 severely. There's roughly 800,000 people in the UK suffering from electrosensitivity. Just out of interest, let's have a show of hands. Anyone in the room is electrosensitive or know that they are? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's 7. That's 7 people that know it. And how many of you don't know it? Okay. Interesting. So what are the symptoms? What are the physical symptoms? There's quite a big list of symptoms, and obviously people put it down to, I've drunk too much red wine last night. I've got a headache. As they walk past their smart meter at the same time. Depression, anxiety, tinnitus is very common. Headaches are very common. Certainly skin issues, skin tingling, skin rashes, fatigue, and then obviously the longer term issues, cancers and infertility. These are known harms. More scary is the changes to human DNA, fertility, neurological damage, and cardiovascular damages. Now I've got, I'm not going to go into all the references for this, but we've got, if anyone's interested afterwards, we've got a book of references where this research has been done. There's many organizations looking at this right now. I would say people, there are certain individuals out there, people fitted with pacemakers, metal implants, children, immune-compromised people in hospitals are affected by this form of radiation at 5G levels, at the gigahertz levels. And just to show you what it does at a cellular level, at a blood level, there was an experiment done with 3 humans, and I'll show you a video in a minute. And it was the exposure to a smart meter, in close proximity to a smart meter, 2 minutes exposure to a smart meter, and it shows you the reduction in the blood cell, or the effectiveness of blood cells to transmit oxygen and nutrients around the body, and the impact on our immune system to fight disease is obviously down to how well we function as a human being and how well our blood functions. If it doesn't function, we become sick. We basically, our immune system is lowered. We don't catch cancer. Cancers are in our body all the time. Our immune system is fighting against cancers all the time. If you lower your immune system, you're exposing yourself to letting these cancers mutate and grow. You can't, it's not something you can catch. So it's a deficiency in your immune system. Simply put, I'm not a doctor, but this is what science is telling us. So let's look at these 3 cases in terms of their blood under dark field microscopy.
In our second set of tests, we're using the smart meter. Before the exposure, we see the same thing as we saw in the first samples. Normal cell walls, fairly separated and looking healthy. So after 2 minutes of exposure in front of the smart meter at about 1 foot away, we see a totally different story. Sample 1, you can see a lot of degradation in the cells. The cell walls have been broken, and you see changes in the cells which are called mycoplasma. It shows a mutation to the cell. In the second sample, we see a different type of degradation to the cell membranes. You can see a corrugation here. This is called bottle cap formation, and it's known that this occurs due to oxidation or exposure to free radicals. So this third subject, when we did her sample, she had to be pulled away from the meter after 45 seconds because she complained about a increasingly severe headache. And here you see a phenomenon called rouleau, where the red blood cells are stacking up, which makes it very difficult for the blood to deliver oxygen to the tissues as they would be their normal function. Every single one of these is a degradation. Every single one of these shows a trauma to the blood cells, and that came from something, and the only variable was the smart meter. The good news in all this is the patient and the blood can return to normal once they have been removed from the influences of these stressors.
That's very interesting, and it explains why people are feeling ill. And certainly you're getting headaches. If you're not getting the oxygen and the blood flow to the brain, you're immediately going to suffer. And this was an exposure of 2 minutes. And as they said, the third person had to be pulled away from the meter because the symptoms were so severe. These pictures, by the way, obviously there's been a scan of the radiation from a cell phone into the human skull, and these pictures were superimposed to make it look as though there's an actual person. But these are pictures of radiation through the human skull. Now that's basically an adult. You can see the sort of area, the region where it's quite severe, and this is why the cell phone companies do not want you to hold this to your head. It raises the question on also Bluetooth earpieces as well. That's basically transmitting energy. It's communicating to your phone, to other Bluetooth devices. I don't have any information on that, but you could well imagine that thing in your ear all day long is not good. And then you look at children. The children are severely affected. You know, look at the radiation effect across the body there with a child.
Sorry, what is that actually showing? Yes, exactly.
Well, it's showing the influence of RFR radiation through the head.
Yeah, but what influence? Yes. I mean, field strength, heat. Yes.
Well, possibly. I could find out for you. I can't answer that here.
The camera is a heat. Yes, that looks like a heat.
I'll find out, and we'll talk later on that one. So, safety guidelines. There is something called basically this one over here, the ICINRP. So it's a mouthful, but the government are using, and telecoms are using these guidelines. There we are, ICNIRP. Now there's been lots of controversy on these guidelines, and you've got one lobby saying they're perfectly safe. You've got another lobby saying, no, they're not safe. Other countries and scientists are saying that they're not giving you the long-term effects from the RFR radiation. They're looking at purely thermal effects only on short-term exposure. So there's lots of discussion about these guidelines. Now the UK, these are the guidelines the UK are using, and these are the allowable levels in microwatts per square metre. These other countries are using much lower levels. In fact, India reduced their levels years ago, realising that the harm being done by RFR radiation. But the UK is still using these guidelines, and there's basically a factor of 100, roughly 100, if not more, in terms of radiation exposure using these guidelines. Other countries, Italy, Poland, India, China, they use them. They use guidelines for long-term RFR exposure. The thermal effects are something different to the RFR exposure and long-term radiation. So what is it doing to our natural environment? And this is where I'm quite concerned, I'm sure you are, about Purbeck and our beautiful natural environment. What's it doing to the farms and the insects? There's certain evidence in America. Basically, one example, 1989, 75% of insects in cell tower areas were being wiped out with the rise in wireless technologies. Now, there is an argument where it's being caused by other things, but there was loss of habitat reasons, habitat loss and pesticides being used since 1945. Well, there was a farm, an area in America where grasshoppers numbers fell 33% in Kansas, where there was no habitat loss due to pesticides. So there is correlation to insect loss purely down to RFR radiation. Bees in particular are affected. Bees are suffering from this piping stress in the hives next to 5G masts. They either die off or they move. It's not good for bees. The fertility of fruit flies, and this is 4G. This is back down a level to the megahertz, 900 megahertz radiation. They've seen 60% reduction through DNA breaks and cell death. So obviously, as you up the frequency and the power, you're going to see more insects die off.
Can I take exception to the figures? The figures are wrong.
Can we have questions later on afterwards, and we can have a discussion. Now I've pulled these from various references, and obviously we can talk about that later on. On farms, I pulled up a reference from a French farm, and this was a 4G cell tower. They've now switched it off for 2 months basically because the farmer was losing milk production, between 15 and 20% loss of milk production, and some of the cows died. Whether it was due to the radiation effects, I don't know, but certainly the milk production dropped. The mayor who had approved this technology did a total U-turn and agreed with the farmer that there was such an effect on the farm that he wanted it switched off, basically. And this was within 200 meters of the farm. Then the mayor got a bit concerned about the inhabitants of the local village, what effects it's having on the population of the village. Big question mark. India in 2010 dropped their RFR levels to 1/10 of this guideline, which is the UK guideline. So they were seeing harm being done, and they dropped their levels. There's various references to these references. I won't go through all of these problems with insects, but there's significant disruption to our insect population. I won't read all that out. Bees, we've talked about the piping stress in beehives. I've got a friend nearer London in Surrey. He's lost 2 hives recently, 2 populations of bee population through 5G masts being put up in the neighbourhood. The immunity and fertility in bats, rats and birds are being affected. It's concerning. You're seeing sort of some of these animals being destroyed, and they're trying to find areas in the UK where they can reproduce in areas outside of this coverage, which is difficult. There's been a number of court cases. The first one was against Gateshead City Council. There was a chap who worked for the military up there, spotted the 5G technology on one of the lampposts, and he started to challenge the council. And basically the court ruled that the council did not inform the public about the harm being done to the local populace. So the council have a duty to put warning signs, like smoking we've seen on packets of cigarettes. This can cause cancer. The councils will have to put notices in local areas about the harm this is causing. There's a court case that's just gone to appeal. The appeal has been lost, unfortunately, in London, a major court case. And we can, if you want to discuss that afterwards, we can talk about that. Interestingly, in Europe, the regulations here were deemed not adequate to incorporate the results, and they basically turn this down. These regulations that we're using, they're using the long-term effects of radiation in their guidelines. So these were ruled out. There's various cases ongoing as we speak, mainly against the governments, and there's many appeals ongoing as well. It's a real battle because the telecoms companies and the government are trying to roll out this policy, and yet the public are now waking up to the harms. So we're in for quite a battle, I think. This is an interesting one. Lloyd's of London will not underwrite personal or public liability insurance for many of the insurance companies. They deem this RFR too risky to insure against. In other words, if you made a claim for harm from radiation, they wouldn't pay out, and B, they don't cover it. So that affects public liability insurance as well. So check if you've got Bupa or private health insurance. Please check your small print. They're refusing to pay out. Property values. Obviously, you've got the physical appearance of masts. You've a known harm being caused by the 5G radiation. So property values are being affected. We're seeing some areas where they're dropping in these mast areas. This is very difficult to see, but I pulled down a map of Vodafone coverage. Here we are in Swanage. We've got the mast in Days Park. We've got quite extensive coverage around Swire Head, and I live in Kingston, so I'm affected right here. Extensive coverage in populated areas, and this is just Vodafone. So you've got other companies with other coverage. I know there's coverage around Lulworth and Kimmeridge. So it's the start, basically, of a very extensive network being rolled out. So we were helping Corfe Parish to challenge Dorset Council. So we gave them a number of questions to ask Dorset Council. One of which was the insurance angle. Lloyd's of London refused to underwrite the insurance. So why aren't the government informing councils that you cannot get insurance for this risk? We asked them to request proof of this commercial liability insurance, and the answer was they weren't sure. They weren't sure about they have any liability insurance. So you could take that as a no, basically. We challenged them on the guidelines, but again, Dorset Council said it's government policy. It's not nothing to do with us. It's government policy. Then we said, well, wait a minute, you have a duty of care to the public. We didn't really get an answer on that. So they're standing behind the government policy. The other thing that should happen at a national planning framework is that you should basically get evidence that everyone's been consulted and everyone's happy, and you can move forward with this technology. Now, we know that's not happening. Basically, these planning applications are being approved nationwide without too much consultation, A, to the public or to industry around the area. Of course, everyone wants the data, the high capacity data, and not many people are aware of some of the harms. So there's a balance, isn't there? You know, you buy a microwave, you don't leave the door open. A, you can't switch it on, but you feel as though you want the microwave food, but you want to stand a bit back from the microwave. Okay? It's a bad example, but that's the sort of thing that's going on. We asked them, how are they informing the public? How are they informing the farmers and schools and businesses? The answer was, we're putting a notice up on Rollington Hill, on the top of the hill, to inform the public. And I said, that's not good enough. Now, we talked about the coverage and the, you know, you've got all the telecoms companies, you've got satellites going on. Who's monitoring our airspace? Who is going out there with a meter and saying, well, it's safe to be on Swanage Beach, or it's safe to be in Days Park near the school? Who's monitoring that? And the answer was no one, no one in the council. You know, we have a rivers authority. We don't have this electro-smog authority, which is far more dangerous, I feel. I know the telecoms companies probably, you know, they commission their equipment and they go up and they measure certain things. They disappear for a year or so, and they may come back and do some monitoring. I don't know. I'm not going to go through all these references. We've got a bookload of references of where this data comes from. But I'm coming to the end of, been talking for about 45 minutes, but I'm coming to the end of it. I hope I've given you some knowledge and raised people's awareness of this. There's lots of things to be discussed. You know, we've had some questions from the audience and we'd like to discuss some of these things. That's fine. Let's raise the awareness. Let's get us all on the same page. And there's this balance between benefits and harm. Mobile phones are not going to go away. Let's face it. So we're going to have to learn to live with it, but there is a balance between knowing what harm it's doing and usage. There are ways to manage it. You know, if you want to manage your radiation in your home, go back to Ethernet cables and fiber optic and turn the Wi-Fi off. Okay? So there are ways to manage it. I've talked about this guidelines. I feel, some of us feel that they're wrong. They're not using the correct guidelines. It doesn't come without a great shock, this. Corporations, governments, and government may not have your health as a priority. Right? Don't assume that you're being looked after. We have to look after ourselves. But you have to have knowledge to do that, so fine. Regional and town councils are being told not to interfere. I think that's shocking. I think they have a duty of care, and we've told a few of them already they have a duty of care in public office, and we're there. You know, some of us in the audience, Maxine, we're not experts, but we feel it's our duty to inform people and help the council. You know. Be wary of smart meters. They're emitting very strong radiation. So if you've got one at home and you may be suffering with some strange things, stay away from your smart meter, or get it removed. You can purchase little devices to measure these things like dimmer switches, transformers emit quite high EMF radiation. Don't sit all day next to your laptop with the power source right next to you. You know, try and keep it away from your body. You can measure these things. Turn off your Wi-Fi at night. That's my recommendation. And don't place mobile phones near your body. That helps to reduce these effects. Check your health insurance policy. And I said use fibre and Ethernet cables. Go back to fibre optics and copper where you can, certainly at home. It's actually faster. There's a great deal of more information on some websites. This one in particular will help you get information. es-uk.info. We've got some books on this here. And please pass on this knowledge to others. You know, help others with knowledge. Let's all raise awareness of these things. If you want a copy of these slides, that's my name, that's my email address. If you want copies, see me afterwards, and I'm quite happy to send you information. So I've been a little bit serious. You know, let's have a bit of brevity. You can read the cartoon. Do you mind if I strap your phone to my forehead so I can pretend you're looking at me when I talk? How many situations have you been in with that? You know, So if you have any difficult questions, we'll take those on a one-to-one, and we can have a long discussion about that. Or if you've got some other questions, general questions, let's take a few now.